Sorry guys, we were late. My bad. I'm trying something new here, so just give me a second. I started jamming to the song. I met Andres Sierra the other day, and then I found out his music. Everyone should try to go check it out.
All right. Hello. How is everyone? Everyone say hi to Tessa. Going to be helping us out today for our live.
Hey.
So let's dive right in because we have a lot to talk about, and this book is extremely exciting. I will be tweeting the name of the song after the live. It's from a friend that Tessa and I just made. Super loud echo. Do you hear that too, T?
Yeah.
Let me try to take you off and add you again. So re-request.
Okay.
Does it sound better like this? Is there still echo now? Is there still echo now? So much echo still? Oh God, okay. Give me a sec. We'll try something out. Is that better? No echo. Okay, so let's see something here. So no echo. Okay, cool. We're waiting for Tessa to join.
Okay. So now we'll test if there's echo.
Tessa, you might have to put headphones in.
Copy that. Oh, I have yours, but you gave me a thing.
No, but those don't have a little adjuster. Yeah, T, you have to wear headphones. I hear it too, guys. Just hold on.
Okay, I have these, but they may be dead. Hello?
Is that better?
I don't know if they're working.
I hear you. Is this better?
Hold on one sec. Let me just try something.
No, T, I don't hear an echo anymore, so I think it works. Ah! Okay. T, I think it's working.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, sweet.
All right, good. So we're going to dive right in because we have a lot to talk about. So everyone, thank you for coming for Rosende Reads Returns with our first book of this year, Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. As you guys can see from the books that we've chosen and from the beginning of your reading, hopefully this year we intend to do books that might be a little more intense, books that I've always wanted to read and that Tessa has inspired me to read some of them as well. So that's pretty cool. As you guys know, Tessa's going to be joining us for the conversations for The Handmaid's Tale. And what's it called? And oh, baby Cam says hi, Stella T. So Matt's on the live. So so we have so we're gonna do something new at the beginning of these book clubs now. At the beginning of each book, I am going to be inviting a fan or a fellow book club member, not a fan, a fellow book club member onto the live with us, and they will give essentially like a 5-10 minute book report. So Tessa is going to be our first book club member to do this with Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. She's going to tell us a little bit about Margaret Atwood, a little bit about the book, and a few interesting facts now. And then as we do our live, she'll bring in bits of tidbits and whatnot for all of us to kind of communicate and talk about. The reason I wanted to do this and why we had this idea was because I wanted us to really be aware of what we were reading, be aware of why these great works of art were written, why they're important, and a few interesting things to realize that the world of a book isn't just the book itself, everything that goes into it to create this entire world for us to become a part of. So, Tessa, I'm going to let you take it away.
Right. So the reason I'm on this live for this book is obviously, as you guys have read the first over 100 pages, you can see that it's pretty necessary to have a woman's perspective in this, and also to talk about the conversations that's not just necessary for women to be having, but for men to be a part of it as well, and to listen to women and to hear what it's like when they experience things like we're reading in this book. So, Margaret Atwood is a Canadian novelist, poet, like lyricist, actually. I found out that she wrote lyrics to a rock song. Yeah, it's actually, you should look it up. It's pretty funny. But she's literally done everything, and I honestly couldn't keep track of all of her interests. She just seems like such a well-rounded human, and I feel like you can tell when you're reading her books because she seems so interesting just from reading. And so when I was looking her up, I found out so much information on her that makes sense when you read the book and you see the humor in such a heavy book, and you see that humor and you can see it in when you're reading about her.
I think that brings up one thing just important about humor, is that it's meant to give light to situations like this. And I love that there is humor in the book.
Well, yeah, like any dramatic TV show or movie or book or anything, any sort of art form that's very, very heavy, it's really difficult for humans to take it on if there isn't some sort of levity. And it's not to get super dark, but we're reading Handmaid's Tale, so here we go. You'll see it a lot at funerals, you know, when it's such a heavy time and people are really feeling the weight of that, it's very easy to get a laugh at a funeral, and people find ways to bring light into the situation, because as humans we can't survive with that weight constantly. And you see the people in the book trying to survive by finding ways to escape it or to not feel that heaviness all the time. But just trying to keep myself on track here, Margaret Atwood, she was born in the capital of Canada, in Ottawa. Are you laughing at me?
Yeah.
In 1939. And she, from a very young age, was a writer and wrote a lot of poems and stories. She was actually homeschooled because her dad is entomologist. He's an entomologist. He studies insects. So they were kind of isolated for a bit. And then she started school, and by the time she graduated high school, she wrote in her yearbook that she wanted to write the great Canadian novel. She'd already knew that this was,
so that was like
her...
In her yearbook, like her famous quote was like, "I want to write the great Canadian."
Yeah, isn't that so badass? So yeah, she already was very determined from a young age, and she's just a really, really cool person. Like, the more I looked up, more info I looked up on her, like she had basically under a pseudonym, she used to write comic strips, and she like was an underground comic artist. There's actually, I know,
comics of hers online.
Yes, and most recently she just wrote like they're making something out of one of her comic books, I believe. I have to look up more info on that, but I think that's a recent project that people are making into some sort of show now. A lot of her books have been made into. Handmaid's Tale was a movie way before the TV show in like the 90s.
Okay.
But anyway, yeah, always getting off track because it's really hard to. She's all over the place.
Why don't you go a little bit into the history of why she wrote this specific book? Like, what was going on at the time? Where was she?
So she lived in Berlin. Right. She lived in Berlin at the time when she started writing it. And she didn't call it Handmaid's Tale at first. And you guys might have read that in the intro. But she started it there. And that was the time of the Cold War when she was in Germany. So I feel like that would influence you when you're thinking about these very drastic views politically. And so just the time in the 80s, that inspired her a lot to think about this and how important it is not to be complacent when it comes to your rights and your responsibility as a citizen.
Yeah, and that theme of complacency we see throughout the book, how Margaret Atwood kind of reminds us through Offred of the little things that we used to take advantage of. Like what we talked about before we did the live, like freedom to, freedom from, all of these little gifts we had that we aren't aware of and can be taken away if this complacency continues, which brings me back to when we talked about the types of fiction in 1984, how they said there's like, what if this continues? And I think this book is kind of all of those fictions, because it's saying if we continue to be complacent, this will happen. What if we're complacent to this extent? What could happen? And I think that's a really cool thing to touch on.
Yeah, it's important to remind ourselves that everything is cyclical. So the scariest part of reading this book was knowing that every single thing that she references has happened at some point at some time or is still happening. So it's not. I want to read through these comments and see who thought it was really far-fetched.
Okay, yeah, let's do that. Let's open it up. Everyone, so that's a question I'll ask. How did you think of the reality of the book? Did you think it was something that could never happen? Did you think it was scary because you feel like it's starting to be paralleled in our world right now? What are you guys thinking about that?
I don't know if I have access to all the comments.
Real. You thought they were real. This one fan. It could happen. Yes. Annie Hansen.
Yeah, you might have to read them because I can't see them.
It was hard to read. Yes. Tippy 7 Step. Not parallel, but yet possible. That's something that I think is a good work of art, when they kind of take things from our world that we can believe to be true that aren't quite there yet, but they're like, this is not far-fetched.
No, it's so not far-fetched in fact to go.
Sorry.
Oh, yay! To take it a step further, it has all happened and it is still happening. If we want to, Margaret Atwood made a big point of saying, I'm not trying to make this stuff up for my own agenda. This is me stating women were forced to bear other people's children. Women were forced to give their children away. Women were killed for having abortions. Or doctors and male doctors were killed for giving women abortions. Everything that's happening in this book is so has happened or is still happening. So,
and then one thing I thought, my mom actually just texted me and brought this up.
Yeah.
Because this is one thing I think about when we compare it to 1984. So the book was written in 1984. 1984 was written in 1950. So when we think about the different perspectives that we're talking about, 1984 was completely in the perspective of Winston. This book, also our second dystopian novel, is in the perspective of Offred the entire time.
Yeah.
Which I think is really cool, that she's having this whole world reality, but through a woman's perspective, especially at the time that she wrote it. And then now that we're reading it, I think, what do you think about that, T?
Well, she actually, Margie, I'm like, I'm talking about her like I know her. You know, Marg, she actually talked about how she had read a lot of dystopian novels, and she was like, they're all written with male narrators. So she was like, why don't I try putting it through a female lens and see what that would be like? And yeah, women are so often used as a resource in their fertility, so it's really it's really on the nose, unfortunately.
Well, you bring up women as a resource, to me, brings up one of the themes of this book, and that is, let me look for it real quick. That in this book specifically, like we've seen in our history itself, in like especially recent political things happening, is that women's bodies were used as political instruments.
Yes. Yeah.
So
I mean,
I wanted to bring that up.
Yeah. No. I mean, keep going.
Well, I just wanted to bring that up and see what you said about it.
Oh, okay, great. Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, essentially, so we're seeing that fertility rates has significantly decreased, and now their bodies, they're no longer an individual. They take away their names, they take away anything that gives them a sense of being a person, really. And there's a quote that I know we'll get to quotes later, but she says, Offred says, it's my fault. Well, not mine, my body's fault, if there's a difference anymore. I kind of paraphrased it because
even in doing that too, there's another theme that it touches on, is like how language, how the power of language, it's a tool that they use, the way they change things. And then I'm going to touch on a comment that I read too. Rita, everyone knows Rita, Rosende reads PDFs. Rita said something really cool. She goes, I remember in the epilogue of 1984 when they said any word can be negatived by adding the prefix un. For example, uncool, ungood. Isn't that what happens with the unwomen and unbaby? And they're slowly changing. And this is something that we're seeing in dystopian novels now as a theme. We're seeing it in life, this idea that if we change certain things of the words, we can change their meaning, like fake news or alternative facts. And I think that's something that we're experiencing even with the ways she references her body and her thoughts. And I mean, she didn't even accept her room as her own room until later in the book when she felt like she needed to have a space.
Right. That's a whole very interesting struggle that I think Margaret does a really great job of showcasing, is how the character's arc of saying, no, this is not my reality, and this is, I'm not going to stay here. I'm going to get out, basically. And then as she slowly starts adapting to this new normal. And I love how she writes, and you get in this character's mind, and it's not, the thoughts aren't filtered. So you'll see her be like, yeah, I'm going to go put that in my room. And then she's like, I just called it mine. And she has that realization. And it really, like, I find it very touching. I find it really moving when you actually get to hear her thought process as opposed to just the filtered part of it.
For me, I think that's one thing that brings me into this book more. 1984, I felt like I was almost part of the party, like watching this. And then in a few moments, I would come behind and like take the lens of Winston. But for the most part, it almost felt like a narration where I was watching after I was watching someone's life, like as if he had narrated it. Whereas this, I feel like the things that she says that shock us, we always forget we're in this weird world, and she does too. And I think that's why that quote about normalcy, how it's just something that normal is just what continues to happen. It's not right. There's no standard for normal. It's just as long as it's been there long enough. So I think that's something that's cool, because we get to kind of be affected by this lack of normalcy, or we get to also have those moments where like, oh, we just caught her saying my room. That was a moment for me. I was like, you said my room. And then she's like, I said my room.
Yeah, it gives me shivers.
And we're both there. And I think that's super cool.
Especially when she goes off on those tangents of escaping through her thoughts. And she'll just make herself leave the space by imagining and daydreaming about her past, the time before.
I'm going to bring up a quote really quickly, T.
Yeah.
what the fucking polar? Sorry, I don't know what that is. So speaking of the thought process, I think that was one of the things Atwood said she struggled with when writing the novel, was getting more into Offred's thought process rather than narrating.
Yeah, I was wondering how difficult that would be to put yourself in that situation without without being there, without, you know. I feel like she had to have done so much research on the psychology of survivors or people in those type of reduced circumstances, whatever.
It's why her memories have such important place in her books. It's also her way to cope with everything and not forget who she is. That is the thing. Her memory is what attaches her to. We don't know her real name officially in the book.
Yeah.
Many people in the TV show have the speculation, and the TV show has chosen to give her a name.
Yeah.
But in the book, we don't have a name for Offred other than Offred, and I think that furthers her point that she wants to keep that secret to herself. She doesn't want to tell us. She's like,
well, it's too dangerous. It's too dangerous to tell your name.
Even in that, she's bringing us into the world, because not even us, the people who are sitting behind her personal thoughts, experiencing this world with her, don't have access to that powerful of a secret.
Yep. Where is that quote? Do you remember the one where she says, I repeat my name to myself. I remind myself of how people used to see me, of what I used to be able to do or what I can do. And then she goes, I want to steal something.
Yes, that was actually recently. That's in like chapter...
That was page 111, but I can't... Oh, here it is. I repeat my former name, remind myself of what I once could do, how others saw me. And then she says, I want to steal something. I like, loved that.
To me, it feels like a little like...
Yeah, no, I was like, yes, girl. Like, show him. Like, by stealing, like, what? Like a small flower. But, it's so... I just love... I love the TV show, and it's really cool reading the book because you get another layer. I'm just so happy that we're reading the book too, because it's just so. I love her in those daydreams where she's like with her daughter or with her best friend, and then all of a sudden the story stops, and you're like, wait, what? And then she's like, not now, because someone's looking at her and they might think that she's thinking too much, which, God forbid, women have thoughts or opinions or use their voice. They added a beatitude about blessed is he who is silent. Yeah. It makes me so angry.
Yeah, but then we also see the power of them taking that name away. My mom brought that up just now. They change their name so they can lose their identity. They're constantly trying to make everyone in this world conform to this new identity. And that I'm in worlds like this, I want to go into everyone's mind like we are in Offred's. I want to see what in Aunt Lydia's mind is really going on. What are her ways to rebel? And I mean, to me, there are little moments of that where you see in the sitting room that one pillow that says faith, a word that's not allowed, but whose little act of rebellion was that? Yeah. You see Nick, he has those little acts of rebellion in choosing. I've only read up to the point that we've read, so no spoilers. But
no spoilers.
Yeah, even up to the point when he decides to kind of make that first like hello to Offred, or in the last part of the chapter where he meets her in the sitting room in the middle of the night when they're not supposed to be out. That's his little act of rebellion. We see it with Ofglin when she, I think, cries at the sight of the doctors hanging. That might be her little bit of, I'm letting this go and I'm going to be me for a bit.
I don't know if that was something she could control. Like, I wonder if she knew one of those people. And because she is so filtered all the time, and she's always saying the right things, and she's putting on the act so well. We don't know, right? But her letting her guard down and crying is like, okay, so this must be an act for you, because the people. Am I wrong to think that the people that were being hung that day were that wasn't the day that the doctors were.
No, that was the day that the doctors were there, and
or the guards.
She was looking. Offman was the one looking, trying to see who was there. Oh, Anna Cat Fernandez. I don't think I haven't been noticing. I've been noticing you posting these amazing quotes that we're going to get into.
To charge.
Oh, did you guys also wonder what she was going to do with the butter?
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, I forgot because she put it there, and they talked about other things.
I
and
know.
Then they came back to it, totally forgot what the butter was even about.
Yeah.
But another form of little rebellion to keep a semblance of who they are and a semblance of what.
And you see that a lot. So there, a lot of times when people would be captured and they would try to strip them of their identity, a lot of physical things make people feel less themselves. So like cutting their hair, for example, can take away their identity, something that's really important, or something that makes them feel like they have self-worth, or
Then we can look to the historical parallels to that, looking at, let's say, the concentration camps in Nazi Germany.
Yeah, that's
when
exactly.
The Jews were shaved of their hair, when they were put in the same uniform as everyone else. They were literally stripped of any visible gender identity.
Yeah.
Or they were made to be a form, not out of person.
Yes, exactly. And so like her finding the butter to do that is like she gets 30 seconds, say, of her day to be like, I matter. And it sounds so like trivial, but it's not. When you spend time on yourself and feel like you are of any importance, it has a much bigger psychological effect. There's something else I was going to say. Oh, right. So having everybody conform, and also having the fear of if you speak out, the consequences are very drastic. So it keeps everybody silent, and you start to look around. You can't talk to anybody. You can't know if anybody else feels like you. So imagine being in that situation for that long, for any length of time, and you start to feel like you're the only one who doesn't think that this is okay. And then you're going to start to question your own self. And that's why Aunt Lydia says Gilead is within you, because that's what they want. They want to change the way you think. They want to make you feel like I'm the only one who feels like an outsider here. And that's how they really control people, is from changing the way they think, the way they feel. The inside out is probably the most scary and most effective.
But they have to keep. I just can't imagine. But then again, that must not be too different from the way people feel now at times.
And that's the thing. I guess I was just thinking. I was talking to someone about a very controversial topic the other day, and what I find is everybody is just saying the same thing on a loop, and no one's really talking about things. They're just saying what they think is the right thing to say, because we're too scared to admit that we don't know stuff anymore, or we're too scared to ask questions to start a conversation.
And that's why the theme of all of the end of our lives are keep questioning, keep being curious, keep being a positive force for change, because there's a way to question when you're just curious, and then there's a way to investigate when you want to find something wrong, and questioning and being curious is the beginning of all learning, that spark of curiosity.
Right. And we shouldn't be afraid to not know something. I mean, everybody knows way less than. Anyway, there's just so much to learn, and there's so much conversations to be had that are beneficial. And I think if that was more of an active thing that we did, we wouldn't find ourselves rebelling then when we finally get the chance to speak out. I think I just went on a strange tangent there, but yeah.
Does the butter lotion actually work? That's a really good question. We will find out by next week.
Yeah.
I love the message of the book, reading this book so intense. Yes. I just commented about the parallels to the war in Europe. You read my mind. Yes, I think it's because we're supposed to. remember, one of the things that we noticed in 1984, and we're noticing in this book, is that the people who have the power of information can change that information to suit their needs. And we saw that in 1984 when trying to educate and to teach. That's why books like this, The Handmaid's Tale, books like 1984, books like Lord of the Flies, books like a lot of the books we've read, why they're written is to give us constant examples and reminders that we can never be complacent. We must always learn to be better. We must acknowledge our history and our past and learn from it in order to move forward. Because our eyes as humans aren't looking into the future. We're actually looking into the past. We're being propelled into the future by the things that have happened before us. And the only way we can discover which way to go is by looking back. That's something that actually Diego talks about a lot.
Yeah, it's so important, and I find Alberto and I just had a conversation about this earlier today, but I've had conversations with other women who, when I make a comment about being a feminist, they might say that they aren't, and yet I'm meeting these people, say, in a work environment. And so I said to Alberto, I was like, well, they can't, if they enjoy being at work, then they can't forget that there were women who were feminists before them and men who fought so that they could go to work. And you just can't forget the history there.
This brings up this hypocrisy, not hypocrisy, this this irony that happens with Serena Joy that you were talking about too. So why don't you dive into that too?
I want you to talk too about this stuff, because
just the irony of Serena Joy, that she was this woman who gave speeches about women's place in the household and in the world, and then now, because of her speeches that were her work, and she was a working woman at that time in doing this, trying to educate people on their plate, she now has to pay the piper, right? Like in that way, and now she is being confined to the box that she built for herself. And I think what that's commenting on is that it's like one of those things that I think Offred says, where she's like, well, when they came for me, there was no one to speak up. That's also reiterating a poem written about, the Nazi occupation and everything, the Holocaust, where they say, well, they came for the Catholics, but I wasn't Catholic. They came for the Presbyterians. Wasn't a Presbyterian. They came for the Jews, and I wasn't a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one else to stand up for me. And I think that's what that character so far is kind of illuminating, is that this idea of be careful of, even when you have the freedom, what you do with it and how you use it.
And even more so when you do have the freedom, use that. Like, use your ability, like, to support fellow people and be an ally.
Well, and now that we're on this tangent, I want to talk about that quote that Anna Cat Fernandez, you brought it up a little bit ago, and Tessa, you and I have talked about this quote because we wanted to bring it up. The ignoring versus ignorance. Ignorance. And how ignoring you have to work at, whereas ignorance is just easy. And I think that's something that we're kind of confronting today in our world, is this idea of ignorance no longer being allowed. A lot of social media, a lot of the ability to have a voice is now confronting you with your actual, the onus you carry, the burden. You have to have a voice now. And we want that. We want you to have a voice. Either for or against, that's not my business, but you have to use your voice. And we see that in the book, that maybe there are people that didn't use their voices at the time, and now they're in this situation. People that did, but for the wrong side, because they thought, well, it will never happen to me. Now having to deal with those consequences. And just really quickly, because as you guys know, we are a book club about education and whatnot. Ignorance versus ignoring. In our world today, if you guys are American, we cannot ignore what's going on, and we cannot allow the gift of ignorance to be there anymore. It's no longer there. We have our midterm elections coming up in November, so if you guys are of age, get registered to vote and vote. To be honest with you, it's not my business who you vote for. That is your voice.
No, it's just important to educate yourself and to be involved.
But it is my business to get you to vote. I will be voting, and anyone else that I know that's American, it's a friend of mine, I will be pushing them to vote as well. Our votes are little voices that we think are small. When you put them together, they're the entirety of what we want to be saying. And they are very important and powerful. And as you can see in this book, when those voices aren't given their proper credit or given their proper power and then being allowed to be taken away, this could happen. So
And
I had to go on a little tangent there.
no, I'm really, really glad you did, because that's the complacency we're talking about. And they're living in America. Everything's totally normal, they think, and then little things start happening, and they go, ah. And it's the allowing those little things to just fly by, that complacency, that's why things like this can happen. But as we were talking about using your voice, and that it also, I think a big thing that we sometimes forget is it's just as powerful to also use your ability to listen. There's a lot of talking, I think, sometimes, and like personally, there's so much listening that I want to be doing to understand other people that I'll never be able to walk in their shoes, just because of the way where I was born or what I look like. And I think listening is such a big and important part that we have to be doing with each other. Especially, anytime we're making statements online, to educate ourselves before we, say this is fact, or this is something we know, to get the information and to be involved in listening.
Well, and in that listening, and in that, Ash6289 brought up a quote: "Nothing changes instantaneously. In a gradually heating bathtub, you'd be boiled to death before you know it." So
yes,
that's bringing up this idea of listening. If we stop listening, that's one step to this building to eventually us all getting boiled in our own ignorance. And I think I'm loving. I'm sorry. Should we start diving into quotes? We've been on for about a half hour or so, so we still have another half hour to go. Do we want to start in the quotes? Because the last 5-10 minutes, we're going to talk about what we're going to be reading next, and then we're going to confirm the books. So I'm going to start reading comments by people, T. And if you have anything to say and you want to dive in, I'll do the same.
Sweet.
So Anna Cat Fernandez says, Serena gave herself a role that she expected not to be a part of. She wanted the world to do it, but not her. She wanted to be the exception. I think that at least. And that's the thing. I think when we start doing that, in the end, there will be no exceptions, because the people in power want power.
Her mentality is so interesting. I think she'd be such an incredible character to play, because she's just, I mean, it feels so ironic. She's based, actually, I think, on a real person who's a politician who would talk about a woman's place. And then all of a sudden, when she wanted to run to be president of a foundation, she couldn't, because she was a woman. So it's all very interesting, but you wonder how much of it is her capitalizing on a situation where she can feel that, however briefly, she's in this place of power, versus what she wanted long term. Mm-hmm. And if this is something she really felt passionate about, is like helping women with fertility, like, what's your thoughts on this, on her?
On Serena specifically?
Yeah, like, what do you think motivates her ultimately?
Well, I think it also comes from this place of, like, feeling better than. She felt she was better than the other women she was talking about, the women who should know their place. Mm-hmm. She wasn't referring to that as herself. I think, and that's what happened, she caught herself in a trap. I think that because I give these speeches, the men would see me as better than or different. But at the end of the day, they only saw me as the same. And I think that's one of the tools of a regime that is in power to do. We see that, again, and I'm going to bring up Nazi Germany one more time, because we see that with many times in the ghetto neighborhoods that would have, the ghettos that would happen in other places like that. They would they would have the people police themselves, right? They would have the people be like, okay, so you guys are now going to be the the police for this ghetto, and it was fellow Jews that were doing it. And in that, they received some sort of freedom, but at the end of the day, when it came down to it and they were clearing them out, they're like, "Oh, no, you guys get on the train." And they're like, "What? We were doing this?" Like, "Yeah, but you're still one of them." And that false idea of freedom, or that false idea, I think, is what they're touching upon, and where you can see like the real world parallels between her and this. Yeah, that's what I think about it. I think she had that false misconception, or that misconception, not a false misconception, that's it, doesn't make sense, but the misconception that she was better than her outside of this. Okay, so Indigo in Me brings up how one woman's testimony can't be trusted, it had to be two. That's something that I bet if we were to look up right now, did you look that up? Is that something that's going on in the world?
I meant to, and I'm going to look it up right now where that's happening.
Oh my gosh, sorry guys, I got way behind on quotes. So I'm going to start reading quotes, all right? Let's talk about fertility topics. Men weren't fertile, but somehow it was the women's fault. Well, we've seen the same case in history when women would produce female babies over male babies. It was always, historically, they thought it was the woman's fault, not the man's fault. Remember, there was that whole old world thing where like the man's like, "Oh, she didn't bring me any sons," as if it were the woman's fault. But we all know now through science that that's not the case. So
but even in this, with like the knowledge that science brings about that, then they choose to ignore it.
And that's one theme that we're seeing again in this book that we saw in 1984 that unfortunately we're seeing in parts of our real world now. This idea that science and facts and studied things don't matter or somehow can be manipulated to opinion. And that's something we actively have to promote as well. Being like, no, science is real. Education and things we discover to be true are true. There are no such things as, facts are really important. And the minute that science starts getting pushed to the wayside, we have to have our ears up. Ashley, the way Offred is aware of her views changing, how she looked back on how she used to dress and now felt it was immodest. I think this use of memory and understanding is also further pushing this idea of complacency and how the new normal is just what continues to be done. And then these things of the past feel like different lifetimes. But how long did she say it was? Only like 3 or 4 years that she was captured? 3 years, I think?
I was trying to figure out those dates too, especially because the show, it's pretty recent when it's all taking place. Do you know exactly?
No, I don't. I'm going to keep
someone know?
If that's cool. If it's a story I'm telling, then I have control over the ending. Then there will be an ending to the story, and real life will happen after it. I can pick up where I left off. I think that quote was when she was talking about her past self, right?
I think that's when she was putting the butter on her face, isn't it?
I think so. I don't remember. Yeah. What T?
No, that's, yeah. I think that's what it was.
The topic of memory reminds me of 1984 because both books' characters usually remember their past lives to survive and keep an identity. I agree. My mom said fertility was a man's problem, but in the book, women got the blame. Exactly, and that touches on what we talked about there. Am I way behind in comments again? No, okay, cool.
I literally can't see any of them.
Yeah, she said her daughter was 5 when she was captured, and later her daughter would be 8 now. So it's 3 years. Oh, let's talk about that, how she has small goals. She goes, it's good to have small goals that are easily attained. It's interesting because in this I'm seeing, I haven't read it in a while. We might actually read it. It's called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And in it, he was a psychologist that went, I think he was a psychologist, pardon me if I'm wrong there, but he was a Jew that was captured in Nazi Germany and went through like concentration camps, and his whole was a study almost for him, like how did we survive? How do we push forward? And having those little goals for oneself, I think, was one of the things he talked about.
thought of something that I noticed when watching this show that we haven't really seen in the book yet, so maybe I'll keep that thought. But I think something that would be really cool to talk about is the human ability to adapt and to the need to survive and what humans do to make that possible. But I think maybe that's for later.
Yeah, bring that up again in just a minute. Because Rita just brought up something really cool. Rita, thank you again. She goes, oh, also women are kind of divided. Handmaids, Marthas, Hano wives. And then she even mentioned the unwomen in some camp, some far away. And I think that's something we also have to be aware of. The division, so as to not have women unite as a whole. Because, the Econo wives are mad at the handmaids. The Marthas are there to, the Marthas, the aunts?
The aunts are different than the Marthas. The Marthas is like Rita is a Martha.
Okay.
So she does like the housework and chores and stuff.
Right. But that division of is to create a harder unification because everybody
feels alone there.
And that's something that we see in life. We do that. We say, well, those women aren't like us, or those men, that group of people isn't like us. We're better than that, or we're different than them. And that small division, instead of seeing what brings us together, but instead what tears us apart, makes us easier to manipulate, easier to control.
You'll see dictators do that a lot when they're trying to control people. They get them to basically have conflict within themselves, and if they feel less able to relate and to band together as a group, then they're way easier. It's much easier to control one person than it is to control a group of people who come together.
Then, listen to this. How can I have no idea what your handle is, but I love it. And then how there appears to be less division amongst the men. Like there are the guards, there are, my mom, and this division, while there is division, they still are in power. So it's not as palpable. My mom said, and that's why it's so dangerous, and the author wrote this book to bring up the issues. Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
How the Marthas and women, everyone's seeing the handmaids that are always judging. Harder communication, harder to overthrow the government in the situation. The eye. Exactly. I mean, the cool thing is, I don't know how, oh my gosh, we didn't do like an introduction to new members, if there are new members. Well, if there are new members, thank you for joining. If you're commenting, and awesome. I'd love to see what we can do. To the old members, thank you for sticking around. For everyone that was with us last year when we read 1984, I really hope we're noticing these parallels between these dystopian futures. So these dystopian novels. So we're seeing these tools of power, a way to control society, in both books that parallel. That one specifically speaks to this very oppressive for women in the state, and the other speaks to an oppressive country, an oppressive environment. And both oppressive environments, but one being more geared towards women and one being geared towards entire society. We didn't get to go into, my goodness, who was the girl in 1984 that Winston was in love with? I can't remember her name. We never got to really see her point of view. We only saw Winston. So in a way, this book lets us kind of do that. Maybe. We don't know what the woman could be. And then anyone can be an I. That we're also seeing the use of fear as a tool.
Yeah.
There's that, just like in 1984, there's that ever-looming war that's happening that they're safe from where they are. But if they were unlucky enough to be somewhere else, they'd be in the midst of it.
Yeah, I was reading on the tactics that dictatorships use a lot in order to control people, and obviously force is one of like the first things that they'll do because they need to establish that there's consequences if you act out, and these eyes are, I mean, basically now you have a bunch of people who can't confide in each other, and the minute you say something, you don't know if that person
Julia.
is an I, and you don't, and so anybody could be a spy essentially. So it's constant fear.
No, and that exactly, but that's exactly what they want. They want to create that constant fear. Someone said something really quickly. I'm going to go back. Okay, we're going to talk about this quote. Thank you, LaPresta Mariana. Thank you for coming back this year. There is more than one kind of freedom. Freedom to and freedom from. In the days of anarchy, it was freedom to. Now you are giving freedom from. Don't underrate it. So it's funny how these different things happen. Tessa and I brought this up, how many times in terms of, many times men are given the freedom to walk around at night and not be afraid. Men are given the freedom to go in any country they want and not have to worry about things. But they're also given the freedom from persecution should they do something that isn't considered, that isn't like, they're given freedom from and freedom to, where in this book for women, it seems that they were either given freedom to or freedom from.
That's how Aunt Lydia is breaking it down, because she's trying to basically manipulate their thinking that now they're lucky because now you can walk around and you are protected because someone will always be watching over you. Nobody's going to be able to whistle at you on the street. Nobody can do damage to you. You're always safe. And what she fails to mention is that you pay that by giving away any freedom of choice that you ever had before. So what kind of reality is that? That's not worth it. And it's just that part really frustrated me, because you would hope that women would have the freedom to make these choices and not have to feel that it was their fault that someone then took advantage of them in that situation. And that's what they try to instill here, is that it's their fault always if something happens to them.
And that's another thing. That's another tool of oppression. And that's one thing that we have to pick up on for our own world, looking forward, looking for the better society that we want to create and the world we want to be a part of. What tools are being put in place to attempt to control us? What uses of fear and other tactics are trying to put us in a box?
Right.
And that's why we read books like this. That's why books like this are very important, because they're not just stories. They're methods to teach, methods to inspire, methods to make us think and question and be curious. And that's why I picked a lot of the books that we read are like this, because I want us to be aware of these things. I want us to not only see what the power of a book is, a book that might be banned in certain places, or we need things like this, and we need access to stuff like this. We can't ever let anyone take that away from us. Because what did we find out in 1984? He who controls the past controls the present. Fear is the number one factor in controlling people. What looks like safety might not actually be just that. It can be controlling and manipulating. Yes, a future that we all hope will never come, but a profound reflection on the role of women in modern civilization. Very interesting. You always take people away, try to use fear, never be afraid of saying no. Someone asked me, how much time do we have left? We have about 10 minutes or so.
Is my computer right? It's 5 here.
5. Okay. So, so this was our first talk. I hope everyone has a lot of cool and new thoughts going into the next part of the book. The next part of the book, we are reading to part 12, Jezebels. Which is also chapter, if I turn the page, you'll see it's chapter 31. So chapter 31, part 10. That's page, for me, that's page 226. So we're reading from 114 to 226.
I swear you can read that in one sitting. I don't know about you guys. It seems like everybody that we spoke to it feels like this is such easy reading. This is so
I mean,
captivating.
Well, and that's so. I don't know if you guys know about the master classes that are happening on Facebook, but Margaret Atwood teaches one. Tess and I were watching the introduction to it the other day, and Margaret Atwood says, she's like, anyone that wants to be a writer, you have one job with your novel: keep my attention. That, you know. And I think she does a very good job at that. I can't wait to read more of her when we're done with this book.
I know, and I just think she's so funny and witty and smart, and she seems. I think today there's so many extreme opinions, and I feel like she finds this really amazing way to explore both sides of it. Like when offered. I'm not going to go on a whole other tangent, but when she starts talking about how Alfred's sympathizing with the commander, and I was like, oh my god. And then I think she's so smart.
Well, I think one thing she's doing is, in that moment, I felt the same way. I was like, why is she sympathizing with the guy who's in power? But then again, how much power does he have if it's a system that he has to be a part of? So while he does have power in the sense he's perpetuating it, though, there is, I think it's so cool that she decided to have that slight moment of us being like, well, look at him having to deal with this. Like, is this something he wants? And I think that's also coming to just trying to bring in the perspective of, like, that they're all stuck in this. Serena Joy got herself stuck in this. Alfred is stuck in this. And even the commander, whatever his power may be, is stuck in it because they're all conforming to this society. And she humanizes him. Yes, that's, I cannot say your name, but yes, I agree. So let me read that again for everyone really quickly. For next Sunday, I think it's the 16th, read up to part 12 or chapter 31. That's it. Let me show you the other 3 books. We have Life of Pi coming up after this book. We will pick the person that will be doing the introduction to Yann Martel and the book itself later. Then we have Things Fall Apart. And then we have the unabridged version of The Count of Monte Cristo. We're doing the unabridged version, so we're doing the long one that's about 600 pages.
Hey!
Thank you guys for joining. Tessa, thank you for introducing us to the book. Thank you for your insight into Margaret Atwood and the little quotes and interesting things you brought in.
I know. We have still so much more to talk about, too.
And that's the thing we're going to be doing. Tessa's going to be joining us for every live for this book.
For this book, yeah.
Someone asked me on the live early on, I didn't want to touch on it. They say, what is my experience as a man reading this book? And I think part of my experience as a man reading this book is that I need to have Tessa here for these conversations. Because men for too long have been given freedom and right to speak about women, women's rights, women's bodies in a way that's not their place. Right. Not my place. And I think acknowledging that privilege while understanding my responsibility to be a part of these conversations is part of the reason I feel I not only need Tessa here, but want Tessa here, and why I am really excited to read this book with all of you. We, as men, have just as much, if not more so, a responsibility to perpetuate the world that we all want to be a part of, and to look for this equality from our place of privilege. Yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, I love, the mentality of working together on these type of issues, and not, it's very important for men to be feminists. I don't know why that term is seemingly reserved for women. That's really strange to me.
It's another tool of power, a way to manipulate something that actually is good and beneficial for both parties, for everyone that's involved. Anyone that believes in equality for people is a feminist. It's not a gender specific, it's not non-inclusive, it's a non-inclusive title. Just if you believe in equality in every facet, people should be compensated for the work they do. No one should have freedom from or freedom to that other people don't have. And I think that's what a feminist means. It's not some crazy thing that people like to make it. It's not a title that makes, it's not bad. And that's something that was also part of this idea for power.
Yeah. It's a very, very simple request just to be treated.
Simple thing, and when you put it in terms
Well.
that aren't.
Sorry, guys, we got cut off. We will see you next Sunday, September 16th, 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you all for joining this awesome discussion. And remember, keep questioning, keep being curious, keep listening, and keep being positive forces of change in your environment.